Hello, everyone. If you kneel with me, we'll begin with a silent prayer. Amen. So I've been covering ancient history. I've made this point before, but I'll make it again. Perhaps the biggest obstacle to understanding pagan history and sexuality there is this issue of bias. People with differing views go back to this history to try and demonstrate evidence for their worldview. So someone will go back and say, see, homosexuality has been around forever. Proof, look at all this male-male sex in Greece. Another side will say, modern America is so pagan. Look at the immorality of pagan Rome illustrated in the West today. I would like to suggest that both arguments are equally incorrect. Both are manipulating ancient history to defend their preferred worldview. Distorting history to fit a present-day argument. Question. I'm still speaking about men, not women. Because it's so much easier to see in paganism. Because women were so trapped in these societies. but the arguments equally apply to women. If a man has sexual encounters with other men, does that make him a homosexual? Does that mean he must be gay? So all of these Greek men were gay. I would argue no. And my defense is the following. In the 1950s, is it culturally acceptable to be homosexual? No, they would lose their jobs, they would lose their families. It was like just being a leper cast out of society. So those gay men in the 1950s, they fit into what society expected of them. They married women, started families, had children. So they had a woman fall in love with them. Proposed to her. Stood at the altar and married her. Had an erection, had sex with her. Raised children with her. In any of that timeline, did those gay men become heterosexual? No. That's what is so sad about those marriages and that history. You look back at when they did that, and there was always something missing from those marriages. So if it is possible for a gay man to act as a heterosexual, to fit into society, to have sex with a woman, and still be gay, it is possible for a Greek heterosexual man when society tells him it is normal, expected, to do sexual acts with a young boy. We'll just go along with that. The gay man could become sexually aroused. The heterosexual man can also. That's just how sex works for a lot of people. But as I said yesterday, there's something missing. Those 1950 marriages were never complete. There was a deep soul need in the heart of those men that was never met. And it wasn't all about sex. The attractions and connections we form with people run so much deeper. So my point is these Greek and Roman societies were not composed of all these homosexuals. By anything approaching the definition of what it means to be gay or lesbian today. A Roman man could dominate about anyone or anything that he saw. Be confident in his status of masculinity because he dominated. And then go home to his wife. And in a cultural context, a set of rules, a Greek man could do the same. Just make sure you get married at 30. So you can continue that process of raising new little teachers, students to become new teachers. Now, my argument is not that homosexuality did not exist. There is abundant evidence that it did. There were gay men and lesbian women through all of these histories. The question I wanted answered is, if they're so progressive, could anyone in those societies be an Edie Windsor and a Thea Spire? Or a John Arthur and a Jim Obergefell? And my response is no. Because these societies were deeply homophobic and patriarchal. But despite their same-sex relationships, in that precise cultural context, they were not progressive societies. Because if you fell in love with another person of the same gender, If you're a woman, you don't have many options. If you're a man, you'd better hope they're a slave. Or a prostitute. And if they're a slave, you can go to his owner and say, "Can I borrow him?" And the owner would say, "Sure." But that is not a relationship. Everything is built upon the idea of power. Power, status, not relationship. You had to have the power as a man. Because the minute you slipped, you became female. And that was seen as an extreme degradation. So we've illustrated that through a number of societies. And what we wanted to do was go right back to early history. We talked about the Kahun papyri. The Samu Alu. The Kahun papyri and the Suma Alu. So we could go back as stretch that mindset beyond the history of Greece. We were able to go back as far as the same generation of Sodom and Gomorrah. To see that the evidence of the mindset over here it was not a unique, unpopular mindset. But of all of the things historians disagree on, almost all of them agree on this one thing. That the dominant mindset around sexuality for the ancient world was centered around power, the dominant and the submissive. So they went to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt to see the time of Sodom and Gomorrah. The uncle and the nephew, Seth and Horus, they were not in love. There wasn't some type of spark or attraction between them. The acts were culturally common, as enacting the ideas of dominance and power. It takes the idea of toxic masculinity to a whole new level. And I would suggest if we can trace it from here to here, the idea that the world before the flood was full of practicing gay and lesbian men and women that is why the flood came, is absolute insanity. Then we went to the time period of Assyria. The first quote in the document of quotes, just one sentence for the translators. Like other Oman collections, the Suma Ulu developed over the course of several hundreds of years around the middle of the 7th century BC. First quotes set 3. So what we read about the Suma Ulu was around 700 BC. And that's when we read that the concept of pederasty was first beginning maybe in Crete. We didn't go into Babylon. I just made the claim it was the same. But the little that I did review, it sounded worse. Then we had Greece, Rome, and we continued with Rome all the way till Constantine. I think the last law we looked at was 438 AD. AD. So we've covered a time span from around 800, 900 BC to almost 438, 550 AD, if we were to round up. Do you know, for the dominant thought for that time period, almost 2,500 years. Is that the sex act is a ritual, a reenaction of domination, and submission. It doesn't matter who you have it with. As long as you are dominant. As long as no one can question your masculinity. And of course, there's many variations through that. The Greek lower classes, for example, would ridicule both. But note, none of these societies are considering gay marriage. It's not even a question. Now, again, some people will say, no, there's lots of evidence that they considered gay marriage. And when you ask for the evidence, they always start with Nero. Now, I would argue that to prove something was tolerated culturally, Nero forcefully castrating a man to try and turn him into a woman, and then marrying him, is not a good example. They'll go to another emperor who referred to one of his slaves as his husband. When they look at the writings or responses they have of the common people to these things, society always responded with ridicule. It's not examples of the need or desire for a same-sex committed marriage. I want to suggest we have a continuation of a similar mindset today. That thread of connecting sex with domination and submission is still here in our mindset. You can thread it all the way through paganism, right through Constantine. So whenever you've done something wrong while you're driving, and you upset someone, have you ever had someone raise their middle finger to you? Why is that an insult? What's with the middle finger? The middle finger is the finger people would expect to use with penetration. But if sex is meant to be pleasurable, what's the big deal? I don't know if anyone has ever said to you the following slur. I don't know how it goes in other languages, whether or not every language has the F word. It says F you. And I would always wonder, why is that an insult? To tell someone to go have sex. Because the issue with the F word and the middle finger is that it's essentially telling a person to be penetrated. Even if people don't think about what they're doing, and most don't. I would suggest that under the layers of the ignorance of society, the same mindset and stigma is very much alive. The stigma around penetration and the idea that that will put you in your proper place. The men of Sodom and Gomorrah didn't want to rape a woman. Not because these men were gay, but because women already knew their place. It was these new men, these strangers, waltzing into their city that needed to know their place. And we have the same mindset. And whether people realize it or not, when they raise the middle finger or they say F you, every action has a reaction. And even with ignorance, everyone knows what that middle finger means. Everyone knows that you would expect a woman to be the penetrated. So whether they connect the dots or no, they're continuing the same sexism. That Greek thought of women as incomplete, their view of women as so degrading. I grew up in conservative Adventism. They'd often say modern society is so Greek. I would suggest it is, but not because of immorality, but because of the views of women and the sexism. I want to read a quote by Lisa Miller from, not her quote yet, it'll be, start with, so the question, second paragraph. So the question still remains, this is from Inquiry's Journal. Titled Gay Marriage in Antiquity, How Far Have We Come? So the question still remains, can modern America learn from the same-sex behaviour and attitudes of ancient Greece and Rome? The short answer, no, we can't. Though these ancient cultures were far more accepting of same-sex interaction than our modern American culture is, the fact remains that they both share similar ideas about how marriage should be, and there is no room in any of these cultures for the concept of gay marriage as anything more than a joke, as in ancient Rome witnessed by the reactions to the Emperor Nero, or a corruption of the sanctity of marriage as witnessed in modern America. The nutshell of their argument is that it is the fight against gay marriage in the United States that it's that mindset you find typified in pagan cultures. Which is the argument we've been developing all along. I didn't want to distract from this theme by going into other cultures. Such as Thailand pre-colonialism. But I do want to say, if you're a woman then unfortunate enough to be in one of the harems, you would not want to be lesbian. If you were dragged out and publicly lashed. And a culture that recognizes trans women people who are born with the biological sex of male and transition to their gender identity female. What about all the people born with the biological sex of female? The other culture would be that we would discuss would be the North American Indians. I'm not suggesting that some tribes, some portions didn't have a level of freedom. But when we had the message of understanding two streams of information, we can't use the same fast brain we took to conservative arguments and take them to liberal arguments. And memes are fast brain arguments. Going to share screen for a moment. One such meme you will see shared is this photo of an Indigenous Native American. And they will say, it says the following: Christian leaders stand on our soil and claim gay marriage has never occurred here. Over 130 tribes in every region of North America performed millions of same-sex marriages for hundreds of years. Their statements are both hateful and ignorant. Your homosexual was our two-spirit people, and we considered them sacred. There is so much wrong with this picture and statement. I'm not saying that because I've heard anyone in the movement share it or make that argument. But please do not take the mistakes of past dispensations regarding two streams of information and how we process external knowledge and use them to support liberal causes. People who do that with Greece damage their own argument. And they're wrong. And there is a lot wrong with this meme. Just like the Greeks, they did not even conceptualize homosexual people or gay marriage. The two-spirit person was seen as a spiritual role. people did not get to choose freely for themselves. It was a tribal understanding, and in most cases, patriarchal. I'm not ignoring the pockets where there were matriarchal tribes. But you couldn't just be today's definition of a John Arthur. This ends up being nothing more than just a nicer looking cultural appropriation. The people who were two-spirited were chosen by the elders. They didn't reach an age and make a decision for themselves. If you're a member of the Sioux tribe and you're a woman and you were raped, your rapist would be expected to give your husband some money. However they organized that, you would pay him off. And then he could take you. I'm not meaning to denigrate Indigenous cultures. But I'm not willing to culturally appropriate with our modern Western mindset. And also whether it's politically correct or incorrect. I'm unwilling to justify sexism and abuse. I do not care whether it's modern Australia or Indigenous Australia. Not ignoring the abuses perpetuated by the invaders of this country. We do not excuse the sexism, patriarchy, and abuse of any culture. And you would be hard pressed to find any culture that didn't operate off a deeply misogynistic, patriarchal mindset. So these ancient cultures are not even considering gay marriage. What changed here? So there's two arguments down in our reform line. People have two views. Someone will say, your American Western society is so much like pagan Rome. Jerry Falwell crying out, like Jeremiah. A hail of judgments are coming upon this country. Because it's immoral, just like all these pagan countries that God swept away. And the sexual revolution and the movement for gay rights are two key instigators for this moral fall. The sexual revolution and the movement for gay rights. This is why America is falling morally and will come under the judgment of God. And will divide, and Jerry Falwell agree. Walter White. Or the following argument. I'm not addressing the movement or Adventism. My question is, how has the secular world changed between Middle Kingdom Egypt and modern America? Because we always focus on the glorious land. I agree with the second argument. And that is that all of these societies operated on the following construct. Male, superior, dominant, leader, woman. I'm going to put that in little asterisks. Because it's not just women, it's not just female. Remember, it's anything womanized. So they will put men here. If they play the part or act like a lowly woman. Inferior, submissive, led. What changed between Middle Kingdom Egypt and modern America? Is second wave feminism and the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution said, you know what? We don't care if we're the ones that get penetrated. We are not passive sex objects. We are active. We have agency. We have agency. We have the ability to be active. We like sex too. It's not something you do to us. It's something that we do to you too. And they attacked this idea of the passive. This was the core, I would say, the crux of the sexual revolution. And they physically, violently fought to take down this idea of the passive. Because it wasn't an argument just about sex. The sexual revolution was not all about sex. Because as we've seen all week, when you're passive, it has a lot of connotations and expectations. It affects the way that you are perceived as an entire person. It was not all these sexually active women just wanting to have sex. They wanted this thousands of years old idea of being penetrated, submissive, inferior, passive, done away. The second thing that dismantled this particularly second wave feminism. But feminism from the beginning. They just attacked the construct itself. The entire way society constructed the ideas of power and leadership and dominance. The scale of the war regarding the sexual revolution and second wave feminism it's something that's never been seen ever in world history. And when you destroyed the idea of passive, linked to submission and inferior, and society did this, the masculine, and anything like a woman, feminine, it dismantled the fundamental argument that all of these societies had. Until you dismantled this power imbalance, true homosexuality, equal rights gay marriage, could never have been tolerated. And I want to make the point, this isn't an argument over Christianity. This is all just secular societies. But you can do the following. Say paganism, papalism, Protestantism. If you wanted to link it with Christianity, that would be the way to do it. But rather than blame God and Christianity and think that pagan societies had equality figured out, you should trace it to its source. And it's not Seth, it's Cain. It's not Seth, it was Cain. So the minute you dismantled for the first time in world history this social construct, as soon as society, external society did that, 2013, 2014, and 2015 became inevitable. It was just a matter of time. I want to quote from the same author who wrote the 1989 article, Andrew Sullivan, in the New Republic, The Conservative Argument for Gay Marriage. I'm going to read an article that he put out in 2015 after this Supreme Court case. And in this article, he's going to remind us and then quote from an article he wrote in 1996. And he wrote this article in 1996 because of the attacks that were coming from the states on interracial marriage and gay rights. So if you want to read this 2015 article, it's titled, "It is Accomplished." The source does require a subscription. But they give you a few free articles, which is how I got them. quoting him. We are not disordered or sick or defective or evil, at least no more than our fellow humans in this vale of tears. We are born into family. We love, we marry, we take care of our children, we die. No civil institution is related to these deep human experiences more than civil marriage, and the exclusion of gay people from this institution was a statement of our core inferiority, not just as citizens, but as human beings. It took courage to embrace this fact the way the Supreme Court did today. In that 1996 essay, I analogized to the slow end to the state bans on interracial marriage. The process of integration, this was the civil rights movement, like today's process of coming out, introduced the minority to the majority and humanized them. Slowly, white people came to look at interracial couples and see love rather than sex, stability rather than breakdown. And Black people came to see interracial couples not as a threat to their identity, but as a symbol of their humanity behind the falsifying carapace of race. It could happen again, but it's not inevitable. And it won't happen by itself. And maybe sooner rather than later, the people who insist upon the centrality of gay marriage to every American's equality will come to seem less marginal or troublemaking or cultural or bent on ghettoizing themselves. They will seem merely like people who have been allowed to see the possibility of a larger human dignity and who cannot wait to achieve it. I think of the gay kids in the future who, when they figure out they are different, will never know the deep psychic wound my generation and everyone before mine lived through, the pain of knowing they could never be fully part of their own family, never be fully a citizen of their own country. I think more acutely of the decades and centuries, I want to add millennia, of human shame and darkness and waste and terror that defined gay people's lives for so long. And I think of all those who supported this movement who never lived to see this day. And I think who never lived to see this day, who died in the ashes from which this phoenix of a movement emerged. This momentous achievement is their victory too. For marriage, as Kennedy argued, endures past death. I wanted to add millennia because it's not something Christianity brought. It runs much deeper. In 2015 was not a Western society following pagan ideas. It was something unprecedented. A rejection of a pagan construct. This. We'll take a break now and come back. If you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for how you have led your people through thousands of years, through crisis after crisis, surrounded by so many issues, so many fights. We know you're still leading. I pray that in the craziness of the current world, we might hear your still small voice. Showing us right from wrong. Restoring your people. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.